Wow. And it's like, there must be some good answer for this. But what I've been going on a deep dive on all of this. And here's the both and. I think sociocracy is still a fantastic governance tool that I'm not walking away from whatsoever. And at the same time, there are a few things that one has to add or kind of supplement so that it comes together from my point of view. And because sometimes people are like, oh, like, I don't know. I guess I worry to somehow convey, or that people might think that I'm turning away from sociocracy. I'm not at all. I'm just looking at the broader umbrella of it all. And as for regeneration, there's something about sociocracy that I think, so now I'm going kind of more into the things that I've been thinking. There's something about sociocracy that is fundamentally different from other governance methods. And yes, it's the inclusion, all the things that you've already talked about. But one thing that typically gets forgotten is that sociocracy, with the way it defines what an objection is, I'm going to review that in a moment, puts the well-being of the organization at the center. So let me explain. If you have a consent decision, which I assume basic familiarity, right? We ask, are there any objections? And the objection would typically be evaluated against the aim of the circle. What's the aim of the circle? That's kind of the need of the group, right? It's basically a way to distill what does this group need to do. And if there's a proposal that is at odds with the thing that the circle wants to do or needs to do for the whole, then we shouldn't do it, right? Or we should modify it so that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. That's the idea. Now, what's really cool about this, and it took me years to even see this because it's so subtle and we don't talk about it. Virtually any other decision-making method focuses on the individual. Sociocracy focuses on the well-being of the group. And let me elaborate a little because it is subtle. If you're asked, do you want candidate A or candidate B? Cast your vote now. And I mean outside of sociocracy. You're going to think, well, which one is better? Oh, I think this one is better. I like that one. Or I think this one is good for me or whatever. You're not being asked when you cast your ballot necessarily which candidate do you think is going to be best for our organization. You might ask yourself that, but you're not required to think that. Same with all other decision-making methods like consensus. You might think for the good of the group, but you're not required to. You can just do your personal ego thing and say, no, I don't like it, I block it. Or, no, I don't think this is good for me. Like, you could do that, but sociocracy basically says your individualistic view, that's all nice and good, but what we really care about is there any reason this harms the group? And that is wild if you think about it, how long it took us. And I think there's lots to say about this. For example, this one other important aspect about this is that when people still lived in smaller, more mutually dependent groups, say a little village, a tribe, or something, there was no distinction between the individual well-being and the group well-being, right? You couldn't just walk away and say, screw it, people, right? That was so that distinction was very, very blurry between me and us. And it's been said, actually, the development of democracy in the Greek ancient city-states, there was also back then no big difference between our well-being and my well-being because it was still so tiny and well-connected that democracy actually made some sense, and it was a shortcut, except for to avoid beating each other up. So so all of these things make much more sense in a much smaller, more interdependent scale. And now in an organization, we're in a very different situation because if you say, oh, well, that's what I want, then I can just walk away. And so we don't have that level of shared responsibility for the well-being of the group anymore. Sociocracy kind of re-imports that and says, we're only going to count those objections that matter for the group. And that's both really amazing. And at the same time, it's also a little bit like going on crutches, right? Because the reality is you can't just leave if you're fed up.
Right.
So I think it's as close as we can get to almost re-establishing similar norms that you would have had when we were really more directly dependent on each other. And I'd much rather create a wider context in which that collective us is really at the center of attention, instead of us
This,
having to kind of make our way there. Sorry.
oh, I just wanted to like pause us for a second to just really take that in. I am deeply appreciating this articulation. Um, it's something I've sensed, when Tracy and I talk about our work, and as we're imagining it, we're imagining similar to the donut economics model that really inspired the thinking around like purpose at the center um, of the whatever the initiative is, and how we're thinking about and how she's thinking about the torus pattern in governance. Um, I just want to appreciate that yeah, and that sometimes that's the hardest thing to explain uh, and get across to folks about decision making and how it's different and what's different and what it means. And I think that deep psychological patterning of empire in Western civilization has been the thing that created the disconnect that, of that focus on individualization and maybe even colonization, because you had plenty of room. You could just leave. So this really stimulates so much thinking. I'm really grateful. I want, and I want, and even the thinking around nothing without us, nothing about us without us, this sort of, rights-based thinking about collaborative decision making and yeah, it's and consent-based decision making. I mean, okay, I see. I'm not going to go on. I'm going to let Gil go. Thank you, Gil.
And just so you know, Gil, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And just so that my whole line of thought makes sense, I would like to say another piece after that. There's kind of
I'm happy to wait,
to,
Ted. If you want to go, you want
sure,
to say more first?
sure, because I'm also a little tense because I want to remember what I wanted to say.
Sure.
Okay,
Take
thank
Oh,
you.
sorry,
I
and I
hope you will
apologize.
remember. You will remember, I hope.
I will.
Yes, because there's now basically one comment on what you just said. I love what you just said, Michelle, about the rights-based, and like people often, because of all the harm and trauma, power over all of it, colonization, people's first impulse when they hear about sociocracy is, finally my voice will be heard.
Mm-hmm.
But that's still a me, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
me. And that's really tricky in sociocracy. When people come with this energy, I understand it. It's like you take the lid off and people are like, I will be heard now, and then it takes years till they calm down and they're able to look, okay, what do we need? It's like, oh, finally. And I understand that that is a transition that one has to go to, but if there's too many me's at the same time, it's hard to hold the container. So I just want to acknowledge that sociocracy is easiest to do when we are able to think for the group. And that's my part B. And that's what I've been doing the last 2 years or so, thinking about what is that shared field even that we're talking about? Like, what is that we, right? Because to me, it's not the sum of the individuals, right? It's obviously more than that. It's including our culture. It's our ways of being together. It's all the things that we create together. It's the habits that we have. It's the rituals that we have. It's the worldviews that we have. Everything, shared history, direct relationships, trust, all of the things, right? And I imagine it like a mixed media piece of art, like all of those things, like all the things that I just mentioned, that I just listed, they're kind of woven together into a thing. And I don't want to really make it a thing, but let's just use it as a shorthand. It's not a thing. It's because it's also at the same time a process. But this kind of fabric between us is something that we could call like the context or the common ground. That's the kind of the foundation that we all sit on. And my observation is that sociocracy works the best when that thing is intact. The more ruptures, fragmentation, me, lack of clarity, just not enough kind of things like dots connecting, when it's just kind of, when there's either tension in it or people are just not fully present with each other, then sociocracy really struggles. It really struggles because and at the same time, sociocracy induces some of the cohesion. So it's kind of a both and. It builds on top of it, right? And at the same time, it feeds back into the system. And to me, that's where I go when I say regenerative. That shared something, that common ground, the fabric that holds us together, gets fed and also feeds us in our governance. That's the regeneration loop that I'm looking for these days. And that's what the exciting thing is for me. And then what that means is that we have to combine sociocracy with other things, because sociocracy is just one way of tending to that fabric between us. And then there's so many other ones, sociocracy being a big part, I think, because it holds our decision making about our common resources. But there's so much more we need to consider. And that's what I'm excited about these days. And now my thought is complete. And now it is your turn. Thank you so much.
Good, good. Ted, thank you so much for that. You've gone in depth exactly where I was kind of wanting to wander in, about the thing that is not a thing, that shared something, which Doris Lessing called the substance of we feeling.
Mhm.
The fabric between us, you said, which is torn now and maybe shredded, maybe being actively shredded. And I'm not sure how universally we-ish we were back in the old tribal small place days. I suspect there was always a tension between individual and group, but I don't know. I have no experience in that universe. But you do. I guess you answered the surface level of my question, which is that this is not about technique. This is about culture. This is about how we live together. And so, how I don't even know how to formulate the question. In the world that we live in, how do we evolve an organization from people thinking as I to people thinking as we? How does the sociocracy framework nurture that development? And maybe this is more to where you're going now, where you're exploring now is other than the I can't say it, framework. How does that get cultivated and nurtured? I think a lot in my work about listening for what people really care about, not for what people say they care about, but for what people really care about, and finding the commonality of care that I think is much broader than we give it credit for, even in this shredded culture that we have now, even across the political divides. And that's one place where I look for finding the we and the common interest. So I don't know if I can ask anything more specific than that, but that's I'm wondering in similar territory to you about how do those realms of methodology and culture and listening for care and how we communicate with each other in organizations and communities, not just in meetings. How does that all work? How does that evolve? Is that
Yeah, I
clear
mean,
enough to go
I'm
with?
not sure I can directly answer your questions, but there are things that come up in response that seem related. Answer would maybe maybe said a little too much, but so I still am, and by the way, one of the reasons I was delighted to come is because I'm still practicing how to talk about this even, because it's just so hard to, like, there's a clear intuition in my brain and getting it from brain out of my mouth seems to be, and it's very exhausting. Okay. But the thing that comes up for me around it all is that at the same time, this
Ted,
kind
it might, if I can interrupt, it might not be coming out of your brain to your mouth, but it might be
yeah,
coming out of your belly to your mouth.
that is true. That is very, very true. The the approach of looking at what the we needs, what's going on in the we, basically is at the same time also a radical acceptance kind of approach of what is. Because if you're not planning with what is, then what are you doing? Right? That there's no reason to cover things like it just in the long term. Sustainability is only assured if we're honest, basically. And I don't only mean that in personal relationships, like for example, having such a silly concept as externalities is just a lying to yourself and it's biting us in the butt. So like what I mean is everything that if we want to be real about good decisions, we have to be real about what's going on. Only if we're honest with those things can we make good decisions based on that and have true regeneration. Otherwise, it's just going to be slanted in some way or other and leave things out. So now that radical acceptance approach, see, now where was I going? To me, that to me then leads to something that in sociocracy is present, very present, in fact, but completely underappreciated. And that is all the feedback mechanisms. Like, if you don't give feedback, you don't understand what regenerative governance in sociocracy is about. Like, that's just like, it's maybe the most essential feature of all of them. Because you could do whatever you want to do as long as there's an intact feedback loop, it's all good. You can wing consent as long as you're open to hearing feedback and learning from that. You could wing everything, maybe feedback is the most important one. And people are so reluctant because they'd rather have a glossy story than be connected to what it really is. And it's not working for me. It's like I'm getting more and more impatient with that part of our culture that just likes to have a pretty story. Like, come on, like we're just so beyond that. We can't afford that anymore. So there's the radical acceptance piece. Now that means that at the same time, it kind of goes to the somewhat tried, no one is free until we're all free kind of thing, right? Because if there's something in the field, let's call it that, where there's a clear tension, let's say around inequality, around whatever, it doesn't really matter what it is, then we can't, like, it hurts all of us. Like, we as a collective can move forward when there's a big rupture somewhere. So then governance at the same time becomes, of course, deeply anti-oppressive and liberatory. Now, and that's where I was going. That means what the group needs. Like, there's so many things that are in the way. I think it's not hard for humans to see what the group needs. Otherwise, we wouldn't have made it here. But there's so many things, so many ruptures that get in the way, and so many frictions, and so many things that we're not wanting to touch. I think that things like, practical things like rounds, the feedback loops, right? They kind of, in small, tiny increments, get people used to see what's here present with us. That's what all those little practices point to, if people are willing to go there. And I think sociocracy is great if people are well on their way there. I have no answer to you what we do with the people who are completely, like, who cannot access that part of themselves. I have no idea how to get them here. All right.
I see Deepa.
Yes,
Or
go ahead.
did you have another?
No. I was wondering if you're facilitating. All good.
Good. I see Deepa.
Hi. Hey Ted, thanks so much. You've given me loads to think about. One of the things that I was just riffing off what Gil has just said is the relational. And so to me, the point you made about culture is really, really important, because being Indian, a lot of the dynamics that you talk about feel really natural because we're community centric.
Mm-hmm.
And then the British side of me kicks in, and that's when you get problems. But in the Indian dynamic feels where connection, community, reciprocity, interdependencies are very much part of the fabric. And it's part of the way that a lot of social entrepreneurs design their organizations, because of that fabric and that philosophy of context. And so what I was thinking about as you were talking was, and to the points that Dennis was making about dancing and if people don't eat together, I think it's deeply suspicious. So to me, it's like food and bringing people together around food. So I'd add that to Dennis's list. So I wondered what you thought about the chicken and egg in terms of what comes first, the structure that one tries to kind of, and the container from a governance perspective, or the relational. And so if you have those kind of relational dynamics and trust, then designing for in a sociocratic way in the Western world becomes, I would have thought, easier than trying to impose a mindset and connectivity and connection whereby that group thing, that group phenomenon and being in service of the group would come much more naturally. So is it that actually chicken and egg, it can't fit all if you don't have the relational dynamics sorted first? And does it become a governance pipe dream?
I mean, does one have to be first is one question. I think of it as critical mass. There has to be critical mass. Otherwise, it's just incredibly hard. And a comparison that works for me, that feels right in terms of how I see people learn governance and use governance, Sociocratic governance, that is, but any really, is that it's a little bit like teaching people how to swim. You know, I've just recently actually taught my kid breaststroke, you know, like you do the arms like this and the legs like that. And kid looks at you going like, what? Like, how is that ever going to turn into something, you know? Remember when, those of you who know how to swim, like how it feels so disjointed. You're telling me I should do rounds and then there's consent and that's a circle. That's a like, what? You know? And then actually, you know, since it just happened, I told my kids just like, just do it. Just do it and just do it for at least 10 minutes and stop coming to me telling me that it's not working, you know? And at some point it clicked. And then the leg and the arm movement turned into coherent thing. It like turned into one flow, right? And with governance, I see it similarly. I see my work as getting people to not drown. I just teach them the things enough so they don't drown, and then I trust that the self-reflection and the feedback loop, if they do it, then basically that they improve from there. And that's why that's my work is to start with structure, and basically I'm doing the same thing to groups that I told my son, like just do it, just do it, and do it until it clicks. But I completely understand if people start with culture and trust and relationships first, because sometimes there's groups where I refuse to work with them because I'm like, you have other issues to work on first, you know? So if there's a chance and there seems to be critical mass, then that's the next step. But I don't think there's somewhat of a science, but not an exact science on it. What do you do with my answer? Does that mean or were you going somewhere else?
It was interesting just to hear how you think about it, to be honest.
Thank you, Deepa. That's very generative. There's some stuff going on in the chat that I'm not forgetting about, and I'll talk about here in just a second. Some things that have been stimulated for me. One is on the deck, the Regenerative Governance Principles deck at slide 5, we talk about how governance happens in everything, everywhere, all at once, and the nested systems of the framework of nested systems, individual, interpersonal, community, and society. And that the regulation, you know, at each level affects the other levels. And so that's one piece. I always feel a certain like tension to clarify when I hear folks thinking of sociocracy as a collection of techniques, similar to why permaculture is not a collection of techniques. There are techniques that are familiar in those spaces, but that's not what they are. And that's important to remember. There are techniques that have been vetted and tried in particular spaces that work well and are worth trying in whatever space you're in, if it's similar. Yeah, so that's why we go to principles, different from techniques. And I did want to go over here too. And then just that what I've noticed is that I love that, you just sort of I love that analogy, Ted, that like your job is just to keep people from drowning as they're practicing, right? As they're fumbling and practicing, and to notice when a practice is way off balance, but just to and then feedback and respond, and what happened there. I love that analogy. And then, well, going back to the nested systems, I find that when that practice, and if we can keep people from drowning, the individual, sometimes traumas, I have seen them, I have heard reported that they do get healed. There's something about the shift of mindset that, your needs matter, and we're not going to just blow over them, but we are going to focus them within the context of purpose and your role in the purpose. And then if that's not where this is happening, then we need to make sure there's repair and care so that you can, so that you've got enough empathy and care wherever. And so that gets revealed. And I think in a regenerative culture, that matters, because we're interconnected, right? So it matters if that's there. Around feedback, I just couldn't agree more that feedback is the most neglected part, and you're not being regenerative if you're not getting feedback. You're just not, you're not doing sociocracy if you're not doing the feedback part. That takes time. That needs to be included in the budget. That needs to be included in the resources. That's governance. And so that, there's no way to ignore that. And the difficulty to your question and comment and observation, Deepa, I think some of what you're saying, like this confusion of which comes first, reveals some of the difficulty of trying to do what I call governance in a box. You're just going to bring the whole thing, and now we're going to start doing this instead of that. That too is not regenerative. Permaculture principles, and I think of them as very aligned, is, start small and work from a controlled front. You start where there is a little bit of a critical mass, and or wherever, whatever the energy is, and then you grow from there with a goal of eventually, having the whole landscape be a complete functioning system that then, is just responding to the feedback and humming along. So I think that's those are some of the things that came to mind. There are more, but I'm going to stop now. Go ahead, Lynn.
Thanks, Michelle. And hi, Ted. Yeah, I'm one of your, you never see me, but I do support Sociocracy for All, and thank you for your work. And I've learned from it. And I haven't practiced it per se. I'm kind of more in the classical board governance space, working with established organizations, but taking some of the practices there, but more important, really, the philosophy. What I'd like you to share with us, because I think at one point you were on a quest around wise boards, like the wisdom track. Were you not? Weren't you like getting into that? And I'm very interested in that because I kind of realize sometimes that I think I see regenerative governance as different. Like I think some people, and there's no right answer to this. It's like what facet of the diamond do you look through things? The facet that I look through is that it's not so much that governance itself is regenerative in its, although it has to be like it fractally, it has to be feedback and renewals and all that kind of understanding of inclusion and wise decision making. But I think I understand, or the way that I approach regenerative governance is based on what somebody asked me probably about 2 years ago now. What are you regenerating, right? What's regenerating? What's regenerative? What is it that you're regenerating? And I kind of see governance as having a huge toolbox, like an amazing toolbox of many forms of structure and process, which sociocracy is a strong one. And so are there some pieces of classical, conventional governance. But what we're regenerating is the world, right? We're regenerating the reality. We're regenerating what needs to happen externally. It's not like a governance is a box and we're sort of like, okay, we can sort of like try to get a regenerative governance like in the box. No, it's the coordination function of trying to get all of us working to restore and renew life, right? Like that's what regenerative is, the unfolding potential of what could be, and how does governance support that project? So I was excited to learn that you were on the wisdom track, because I think it's about being wise now and bringing wisdom in. So sometimes I lament that the sociocracy and other governance discussions are too much the how and the circles and very good. I mean, obviously, but it's kind of like not where governance itself needs to be in its project around the coordination function systemically, and really raising the conversation to what is it we are regenerating. So your thoughts on that, please. Thank you.
Oh, gee. And I'm happy to talk more about that one-on-one as well, because this is such a big one. Yes, you're right. I started with wisdom, called my project Wise Organizations, which I was just thinking today, I almost regret. And why do I regret it? It was actually in what you said. And that is that being wise just basically has to do with life, right? Like being wise is basically, by the way, I'm heavily influenced. You might already know that if you've been looking at that. I'm heavily influenced by John Bevecchi on that stuff, who was doing things on the meaning crisis and many other things. And he's heavily influenced my thinking. And one of the things, so he's talking about wisdom, and basically in his most recent work, he comments on how wisdom, rationality in a particular form, being reasonable, being flexible and adaptive, basically boil down all to the same thing. They're distinct, but they're basically all pointing to the same thing. And in very coarse words, to me, that is, how well are you able, and I don't want to make it sound like a 1, 2, 3 steps thing, but let's just keep it super, super simple. It's a little oversimplified, but fine. How well are you able to assess what's going on, pick what's relevant, act accordingly, and stay alive without running the planet into the ground, because that's not sustainably keeping yourself alive. So that's the game of life, right? How able are you to do that? And that is what wisdom is. Being smart is about the advantage in the moment. That's about getting rich right now, winning capitalism. Congratulations. Being wise means look beyond that, right? But there's so many different facets about it. And let's see, hold on. There's one other thing. Yeah. And that means that governance shares basically the same issues that all the other things have. For example, personal improvement and all of that, personal growth. And that is that there is no hard and fast rule on how to do that. And borrowing Vivek's approach, where he's going, is that there's basically all you can do is increase the chances that somehow learning, or like learning as in realizing you were wrong about something. There was something, learning as in seeing new things that you haven't seen yet, right? Having insights, having like new ideas, seeing things better for what they are. That all is increased if you create more opportunity to learn. If you're just sitting on your couch looking on your smartphone, there's certain things you can learn. But if you also go dancing, and you also do yoga, and you also talk with other people, and you also learn sociocracy, now there's going to be more chance that something will come from it that will keep you more adaptive. And so I'm basically borrowing the same approach, thinking like, okay, what are the social technologies? And I don't mean technologies, right? I mean technologies as in social frameworks. What are the social practices that seem to nudge us in the right direction so that we as a group can become smart, right? Why is that? Because I don't want to optimize just for smartness. That's just running after success and being super efficient and like, great, but I'm not interested in that. That's just probably highly extractive. Not necessarily, but very likely. So that's how it all connects. I think I was able to kind of string it together, but there's a lot there that I notice work that Viveki is doing is a lot about identifying what he called the deep code of modernity, right? Which is simply not true. Modernity has been lying to us for a long time now. So that then I notice that I'm still coming out of that. That's why I'm so cautious, because I think I have it, but I don't fully have it, and I don't fully inhabit it yet because I'm still too tainted by the last 2000 years.
I think part of where I kind of go in my thoughts is that at the end of the day, so, you know, that classic phrase, the board or the central circle, whatever, it has to be a wisdom chamber, you know, it has to be like, oh my gosh, there's there's trade-offs, and there's it's not always easy. And there's a group that is entrusted with
And
exercising wisdom, right?
Yeah, that they would have to ideally kind of be the, like, all of it, correcting function on different levels, I guess. Yeah.
But you know, that function of exercising wisdom, because the organization, you know, is an entity that acts in the world, so it has sort of it's got agency itself, right? So there has to be a wise elder group, and that to me is you know, the highest function of the board, is that reconciliation of sense making, action taking, reflection, adjustment, you know. So it's not about the techniques, it's about that function. And I think we get caught in the techniques, but I thank you for your work. And it's so, like, it's really spread around. I'm in Canada, so it's really spread around Canada as well. Friends of ours were just talking about a group they know that are working that system, not entirely happily, but they see merit for sure. So
Thank you, Lynn. Nikki, I see you, and I just recognize that RT put a question in the chat a while back, so I'm wanting to not get away because I think it's a good one. So noticing what the time, RT says, I like the idea of retaining ideas / challenges / opportunities that impact the group, not individual, though that means buy-in or consent on what those are. The challenge I'm trying to get through is circles being trusted teams of peers. Is there anything you want to add to that, RT?
Yeah, I think sort of looking at sociocracy and this sort of concept of circles, and these two words really bother me based on what I said last time, right? Working with an organization which internally trust is so lacking, and yeah, everybody's equal, but some are more equal than others. So this concept of peers is also lacking, even though it could exist. So yeah.
I want to say one thing about that, which is everything that we do is just trying to wrap our heads around the big, vast, highly complex, interconnected world, right? So I see an organization, and for example, an organizational structure with circles and all, as a model of reality, right? In reality, there's all kinds of people connection and so on, you know, like, let's say my partner is in a circle, and in the evening over dinner, we talk about the circle, you know, I'm not part of the circle, and yet I have influence on it. Everybody has influence on everything, is what I'm saying. But the model then says, these are the decision makers. So there's a certain pragmatism to it. And I think that's totally okay because we categorize and simplify and reduce all the time. And there is reduction, like unhealthy reductionism in it. I think the only thing we can do is tie it together, like stitch it together back with feedback again. So the peers piece, it's like, or the trusted circles of peers, basically, well, how do I want to say this? To me, it's a pragmatic approach of doing that, kind of separating out all out. And yes, they are all peers because of circular hierarchy and all these things. And then we stitch it together by having feedback from whoever is not in that group. And that's, I recognize it as a compromise, but as an okay compromise if it works. But we can never forget that it's just a compromise.
And I want to recognize Nikki too now.
Hi, Ted. It's good to be here with you in this space and for everything you're sharing. I really appreciate it. We're in concentric circles, so I've been familiar with you for a long time. Since about 2016, I've been aware of sociocracy and heard a lot of people talk about it while trying to use it for creating intentional communities or other kinds of uh, projects like emerging projects and so forth. I'm wondering because I've seen some things, man, I have seen some things in that space where people are claiming sociocracy and whatnot, but then there's like epic failures sometimes, there's epic wins sometimes, and I'm wondering what you feel might be the weaknesses in the system, so to speak, or what red flags are like, you know, for me, I'm interested in creating a multi-generational community myself, like living space with multi-species, multi-generational. And having seen so many like wild things in those processes of other people where I was like helping them design and stuff, I'm curious what like red flags and green flags you might see in the sociocracy process that can like maybe prevent catastrophe or shows inevitable catastrophe ahead.
One is when, like, one of the red flags is I had that one, somebody asked me, like, this is great. How can I do it with my company without training anybody? I'm like, I mean, you know, that isn't that the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. There we are. I think people underestimate how big of a change it is. They underestimate just how crazy different the world is when you look at it as peers and you let go of that kind of, yeah, of all the hierarchical thinkings that show up in so many ways. So people underestimate it, I think, and that's why they don't train enough. They introduce half-heartedly. I like incremental approaches, and one has to really watch out because incremental approaches can also mean that people don't only do what they feel called to do, but often they don't feel called to do the things that are uncomfortable. So I'm
Yeah.
like, if
Feedback.
there's a lot of there's a lot of glossing over things when you let people and so on. So those are the red flags that I listen to are like, are people basically, are they cheating themselves? Like, are they just bullshitting themselves? Or do they do they have an honest handle? Like, are they honest with themselves about where they're at and what it takes? That's a meta thing. Oh, and there's one more specific thing that I typically say when we don't talk so much about wisdom stuff, which is, are people willing to, oh no, have they bought into the basic assumption, which is using a system helps us be better?
Yeah.
That's a really fundamental thing, right? Because if you don't accept that, for example, let's say the good example is doing rounds, like some people are like, we don't need rounds. That's so rigid, that's so this, that's so that. I'm just gonna make sure everybody speaks. I'm like, oh, are you? Are you? Really? You trust yourself enough? I don't. I'd rather do rounds.
Yeah.
So, but that's where you can separate where people are at, some way overestimate, I think, what they can do.
Right. And then that incremental, I love that warning. Like even if it's incremental, starting from a place, doesn't mean you leave out feedback, doesn't mean you leave out consent, doesn't mean you leave out, the principle levels at each incremental level. Good flag. Hey, David.
Yeah, I'm just going to step in on the last minute because Ted, you provoked me with that, like, will it make us better line? And I've been kind of going back to that because I wonder a little bit if we've kind of trapped ourselves in like the notion of governance and organization. And we're thinking of our current organization kind of, and we need to get outside the box almost or something. And that's why I'm kind of enjoying some of the stuff you're writing now. But I mean, like there is a history to organizations, and the organizations were created to do something, I think. And so that's kind of the question is like, what's the assumption to make us do it better is kind of the framing. And, I think we've chosen in modern society to give, to give responsibility to really smart people to the elite, and they will do things better. And then we're willing to kind of leave aside everybody else in that process. And in this model, I think we're trying to make a bet that if you brought everybody into the decision-making process, it will actually be better in some sense, some definition of better, I suppose. And there's a real choice in here between do you let the smartest kid in the room do everything, or do you kind of have everybody else working together to do it? And I feel like we're trying to explore how to, the inclusive decision-making process is as a better option. And I was going to go up onto the notion that we may want entirely different forms of organization. Like the corporation is a construct it's like 400 years old or something like that, right? We didn't used to have it. The assembly line's 100 years old or 200 years old, right? I mean, we created these structures so we can create new structures. What would a new structure look like? And maybe they're all circles. Maybe that's it. But
there's one thing I want to say on that, and I'll try to keep it brief, which is I love that you're bringing it up, that we still assume organizations have to do something. That's what they exist for. As if humans existed to do a particular thing. What? Like, yikes, like once you catch yourself thinking like really collectives of people exist to do something, maybe sometimes, but do we want to hold that as the gold standard? I'm not so sure. And like, anyway, they have new affordances, fine. There's more things you can do as a group than alone, but is that what they're for? I don't like that. And then the other piece about, so it could look entirely the same, but not have the expectation that its only reason for existing is to do something, to be productive in this world of modernity and capitalism. Because, and you're right, I don't want sociocracy sociocracy is still in the mix of tools that tells you, here's how you can achieve your goal better. But it still assumes that there's a goal. And I'm not sure, I don't know. I don't know what I think about that. Thank you.
Yes, and we're just a minute past time. I'm definitely gonna get this recording up and available, and I really hope the conversation will continue. And we may continue it in this space because it's generated a lot of thinking. And then, David, one of the things that comes to mind for me is that clarity of what it is to, like, it's not so like like sociocracy is not just decision making, but the purpose is of including the voices that are impacted is so that the system can see itself not even the smartest kid in the room can see the whole system. And that doesn't mean you leave out the smartest kid in the room who has the most expertise. You absolutely do not. There's an impact there if you do, and that person's impacted as well. But I think that's sort of why you do. And so that also doesn't mean that everybody's making decisions about everything all the time. That's part of the structure too, just to clarify that, even though it may not have needed it. I am going to let us go because I know there are folks who want to go on to the regenerative iteration call. Ted, brother, thank you. So much wisdom for me personally, so much depth, so much more clarity. Look for, everybody keep up with his LinkedIn. There's just richness there. And Marcus, thanks for this, thing you threw in the water of Carol Sanford wonders if constant feedback might not keep us from regenerative. I don't know. Golly, maybe we have to do a whole series on no more feedback. Maybe we have to do a whole exploration about feedback in this space, which means I'm going to have to learn more about it. Or Marcus, when you get that book read, you're going to have to maybe do a book report.
Marcus, is that the one that's called No More Gold Stars too? Did she change the name?
Yeah.
Or is that a different
No
one?
More Gold Stars.
No, those are two separate books. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because I would love to talk about
Oh,
I haven't read this one, but the other one, and I agree.
No Gold
the
Stars.
notion of
Yeah,
feedback
she really gets into cosmology and ontology and epistemology and
and
regenerative way of
pedagogy.
thinking. Yeah.
And that stuff comes in, right? That's part of the system. That's part of the wisdom, the ineffable that we're all, living within as well.
Thank you very much.
Well, and I would love
Ted.
to
Gotta go.
throw in one more thing, Ted, if we can get you to come back and talk about some of the ideas that you're writing about now. I'd love to have a session talking about common ground, or there's a few topics in there that are just meaty enough that I would love to have the conversation.
Enough for sure. I'll be examining all these series closely for the next thing. And Ted, please, if there's something that you've stimulated to really want to bring back, let me know.
Yeah, please. This is fascinating. We need to hear more.
Really rich.
Yeah,
peace, everybody.
Thank you, Michelle and Ted. Thank you.
Well, thank you.